Good evening, everybody. I'm sitting in my classroom. It's a little bit after 4 o'clock, and I'm recording this lecture for you. And so I hope that you pay attention all the way to the end so that you can take your notes. I wanted to remind you about the active art activities that you can do. There is an active art for cellular respiration, and remember, you're going to go to phschool.com. And your active art for cellular respiration has the code CBP3091. That's for cellular respiration. And I'm going to really quickly flip here in the textbook and see if I can find one in the photosynthesis chapter. I want to remind you that these are nice little pieces of extra credit here. And it looks like there's an ATP activity. You're going to have to check that out. Web code is CBD, so I'm not sure what that is, 3081. It's not an active art, but it says ATP activity, so check that out. And where's the active art for photosynthesis? Photosynthesis activity is CBP 3083. So try and take a look at those and see if those help you at all as you get ready for your test. And remember, it's extra credit in your interactive notebook. So moving on here, first thing, we want to know the location for photosynthesis. Remember, the location for cellular respiration is the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. The location for photosynthesis is those incredible solar panels inside of all green cells, which is called the chloroplast. And so one of the things that you're drawing on your reading guide is a cross-section of a little chloroplast. And the chloroplast is a double membraned organelle, just like the mitochondria. And inside, just like the mitochondria had it's a double layered membrane, so it has two membranes that go all the way around. And only the mitochondria and the chloroplast have these two layered membrane structures. And then it has this membrane on the inside. And remember that on that inner membrane in the mitochondria, that's where we did the electron transport chain. Well, in a chloroplast, you also have the two layers of the membrane here and here, and then it's got a membrane on the inside, and it's across this inner membrane that one of the chemical reactions occur. And then in the fluid here, and there's some more fluid there and some more fluid there, the other part of the chemical reaction happens. Okay, so these individual little pancakes, these are called thylakoids. And the thylakoids are stacked into other things called grana. And I believe as I click through this, you're going to see. Okay, so grana is singular and plural is, grana is plural and singular is granum. Okay, so you have multiples of these thylakoids stacked together. So little stacks of pancakes all over inside of the chloroplast. And it's in these little stacks of pancakes, and each one of these thylakoids, and that membrane, that's where the chlorophyll molecule is located. And this is where we have our photosystems. So the chlorophyll and the other pigments that are inside the cell, they're located in the membrane there. And again, if I go too fast, what can you do? You can pause me and even go backwards and hear me again. Okay? So the photosystems are the individual sets of chemical processes that occur when sunlight energy hits the chloroplast, hits the leaf, hits the chloroplast, and starts the whole process of photosynthesis. The first part of photosynthesis is called the light-dependent reactions. Okay, the light-dependent. And guess what is needed in order for these to take place? You guessed it, light. They are dependent upon light, okay? And these light-dependent reactions have to occur where you have the chlorophyll. So again, as I said earlier, the chlorophyll is embedded in the thylakoid membranes, and so that's where these light-dependent reactions occur. The second part of photosynthesis, okay, is called the Calvin cycle, and it's also called the light independent. Because it can happen with or without light, okay? And this takes place in that fluid around the thylakoid membranes, okay? In the liquid, which is also called the stroma. Okay? So, two steps of photosynthesis: the light-dependent reactions that take place on those little stacks of pancakes across the membrane, and then the light-independent reactions, which is called the Calvin cycle, which takes place in the fluid going around the stroma, going around the thylakoids. And so here we have a really simple drawing of a chloroplast. And I actually am going to have you draw this in your notes. And so what page of notes are we on right now, everybody? We should be on page, what is it, 44, right? On page 44. And so this is for your 8-3 notes. So I'm going to know if you've watched my video, because if you put a diagram of a chloroplast like this one and you label it, you're going to do a DLCE. Let's put that DLCE onto page, let's put it onto 43. Okay, so your DLCE of a chloroplast, you can draw this little booger onto page 43. So this is how I'm going to know if you're actually watching. You can come in tomorrow and say, oh, I did my DLCE. So photosynthesis starts out with our light-independent reactions. What is this little structure here? This little structure right here? That's that set of pancakes, right? Okay, and there's some more there, and there's some more there, and there's some more there. So they're all over inside of the cell. These are the light-independent reactions. I'll get rid of all that gobbledygook. And this light-independent reactions, these have to happen across that membrane. So it starts off with light and water. Light and water are used in this first part of photosynthesis, okay, across that thylakoid membrane. And what is produced? Look at our products here. The oxygen that we breathe is a result of the light-dependent reactions. And you make some ATP and NADPH. Now, if you watched my 9-2 lecture, I talked about NADPH before. NADPH is an energy storage. It's a temporary energy storage molecule. You have this molecule here, NADP, and if you attach a hydrogen onto it, okay, it becomes NADPH. Where does the hydrogen come from? Well, look, up here you have water. When you split water, okay, and remember we have 6 molecules of water coming in, so we have even numbers. The oxygen from the water here, the oxygen that we breathe, is a result of the splitting of water, okay? So this oxygen down here comes from H2O splitting. The hydrogens from the water get stuck onto the NADP and they make NADPH. Okay? Floating around in the cell, in the stroma, you have adenine diphosphate and phosphate groups, and the energy, some of the energy that is released when the electrons start jumping around, they glue that phosphate onto the ADP, and that's how you get your ATP. Okay? If I went too fast, you rewind me. Okay? Let's review our overall equation for photosynthesis. Okay? We had 6H2O plus 6CO2 yields C6H12O6 plus 6O2. So we just found out where the oxygen comes from. The oxygen came from the water being split. Okay? That's the source of these oxygens. These oxygens come out of the light-dependent reactions. This second step here uses the carbon dioxide. So the water gets used up in the light-dependent reactions, and the carbon dioxide gets used up in the light-independent reactions. And what was that called? It's called a Calvin cycle. And the Calvin cycle is the second step of photosynthesis. So light-dependent reactions are the first step. The Calvin cycle is the second step. The things that are produced from the Calvin cycle, the ATP and the NADPH, the things that are produced from the light-dependent reactions become the the reactants, the reactants for the Calvin cycle. Okay, so the stuff that is produced from the light-dependent reactions, the ATP and the NADPH, become the raw materials for the Calvin cycle. And the Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma. So before I can go to the next slide, I have to erase all of this. So if you don't have this down, you can, Well, let's look at our equation, though. Let's see, what do we have left to produce? I said that the oxygen that we get came from the light-dependent reactions. So what must we produce from the Calvin cycle? All that's left, right? C6H12O6. The glucose is made as a result of the Calvin cycle. Remember, photosynthesis, the point of doing photosynthesis is not to make ATP. It's to make glucose. The cell then has to take that glucose and break it down to get ATP from it. The light is the energy that gets the whole process started. And so the Calvin cycle does its thing, and out comes the sugars, as we had predicted from looking at our equation. So just like the electron transport chain was part of the cellular respiration process, we have an electron transport chain and electron carrier molecules. Chlorophyll is the electron carrier molecule, as well as the NADP. Okay, so in one way, some of the energy of sunlight can be trapped in chemical form. So you're taking sunlight energy and trapping it in chemical bonds. Okay, you're trapping it in chemical bonds. So when you put the hydrogen on, it's connected to the NADP by a chemical bond, and that's a temporary way of holding on to energy. You then pull that hydrogen back off, and you have high energy electrons that help you to build other carbohydrates like glucose. So now we go again reviewing into a little bit more detail what's happening in the light-dependent reactions. Please remember they do have to have light, and the products, what's produced, oxygen gas, ATP, and NADPH. Those are the things that are produced from the light-dependent reactions. You've got to have light. No light-dependent reactions. Okay? So we start off by absorbing light by those pigments, and they're called photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. Okay. Breaking down water, releasing hydrogen ions, oxygen, and energized electrons. Okay, then oxygen is left behind. It's released as a waste gas. And if you knew more about chemistry here, organic chemistry, you'd say, gosh, this looks a lot like an electron transport chain, because it kind of is. The other thing you might be asking, how come it goes to photosystem 2 first? See, this is photosystem 2, and this is photosystem 1. How come it goes to 2 first and then to 1? Well, the funny thing is, they actually discovered this photosystem first, so they called it photosystem 1. And then they discovered another photosystem, and they said, oh, wow, the light actually excites the electrons of the chlorophyll there first, but it's the second one they discovered, so they called it photosystem 2. So a funny little aside. And all of this is more than you really need. We've already talked about it. Okay, so we're just going to go through these really quickly. One thing that might be kind of interesting, just to remind you, ATP synthase. Remember the last 3 letter here is ACE. This means that this is an enzyme, and its job is to push hydrogens through. And when it pushes hydrogens through, it actually turns physically in the membrane. This is a phospholipid bilayer membrane, just like the cell membrane. And as it does that, it phosphorylates. It takes an ADP and generates an ATP. So So the light-dependent reactions, again, produce oxygen, ATP, and NADPH, and it provides the energy that is needed to build sugars. So the oxygen is released as a waste, and then the ATP and the NADPH goes into the Calvin cycle. So what is the Calvin cycle? The products, the ATP and the NADPH that come from the light-dependent reactions go into the stroma, and the Calvin cycle is a seriously complex set of chemical reactions that build high energy compounds that can be stored. And in other words, this is where you get the glucose. And all those glucose molecules are chained together and turned into starch, and they're stored in the roots if the plant doesn't use them all over immediately. Calvin cycle is also called the light independent reaction. When I first started teaching it, we called it the dark reaction, but that really gave a misconception because it doesn't have to happen in the dark. It can happen anytime. It shouldn't be happening. It can happen with or without light. And so you'll get to see here just how seriously complicated this whole process is. And we don't need to learn it. The best part about it, we don't need to learn it. All you need to know is, okay, we've got step number 1, and I'll erase that because step number 1 are the light-dependent reactions. Step number 2 are the light-independent reactions. What do you get out of the light-dependent reactions? You get oxygen, ATP, and NADPH. These things go into the light-independent reactions, also known as the Calvin cycle. And the end result from the Calvin cycle is your glucose. Okay. This is taking longer than I thought it would. Sorry. I'm almost done. And lastly, the factors that affect the rate of photosynthesis. How much water the plant has, the temperature, and how strong the light is. There are 2 other types of photosynthesis, C4 and CAM plants. The type of photosynthesis that we've been talking about, this is called C3 photosynthesis. I just thought you might like to learn that there are other ways that plants do photosynthesis. This is called C4. This is crabgrass and sugarcane. Just a little aside. These types of plants do a little slightly different metabolic pathway inside the cells, and so their photosynthesis looks a little bit different, but they're making sugars, right? And if you're looking at sugarcane, that's what we make sugar from, refined sugar. CAM plants, these are our succulents. Pineapple also is this is ice plant that you see growing alongside the freeways. And these are interesting because these types of plants grow in areas where it's very, very hot and can be very, very dry. And so these plants have developed ways of not getting dried out, so they don't allow carbon dioxide into their cells during the daytime. They store carbon dioxide in their cells at nighttime, and then they do their photosynthesis all during the day when there's plenty of sunshine. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that there are different types of photosynthesis, C3, C4, and CAM plants. C4 and CAM plants will not be on your test, just the C3, okay? So I hope this helped you guys, and let's see, how long are we? 18 minutes and 50 seconds. I'm sorry it took so long. I hope that you do that extra active art, and I hope you enjoyed our video today. See you tomorrow. Bye.